Forensic evidence is a major component to any case going through court, whether it's an assault, a burglary, or even a murder. Physical evidence allows juries and courts to come to conclusions of guilt or innocence based on what they're presented. Evidence plays a crucial role in court cases, as witness testimonies alone are often unreliable, although sometimes cases go ahead when all of the evidence is not presented, whether intentional or not. Here are 5 cases where last-minute evidence saved people. Number 5. On December 2nd, 1989, Deborah Milk's roommate, Jim Stiers, offered to take her 4-year-old son, Christopher, to the Metro Center Mall in Phoenix, Arizona, so that she could get on with the housework and keep her son out of the way for a little while. Later that afternoon, Deborah got a phone call that's every parent's worst nightmare. Her son was missing. Mall police were alerted and an official missing persons report was filed after Deborah herself dialed 911. Roger Scott, who was a friend of Stiers, was brought in by police for an interrogation after a brutal 14-hour interview, and he admitted that he knew where the 4-year-old was and that sadly the worst had happened to him. Scott took investigators to the part of the Phoenix desert where Christopher was found, and he'd been shot in the head and dumped out in the open. According to Scott's interview, Jim was actually the one who had killed the 4-year-old after Deborah had wanted it done. Deborah herself volunteered to go down to the police station and answer any questions in the hopes that it would lead to her son's killer. Disturbingly, her interview was never recorded and only one detective, Detective Saldet, was present during the whole thing. A few days later, the official typed report came back stating that Deborah had confessed to asking Jim to murder her son. Despite there being no other evidence, Deborah was charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, kidnapping, child abuse, and first-degree murder. The prosecution's whole argument was built on the confession that was never witnessed nor recorded, and also claimed that Deborah had wanted to claim $5,000 worth of life insurance money for her son. In October of 1990, Deborah was officially convicted of ordering the murder of her son and sentenced to death. Hope came from Milk in 2013, though, when the U.S. Court of Appeals decided that Milk had not received a fair trial and that the detective involved would be subject to further investigation. It turns out that Detective Saldet had multiple counts of misconduct against him, as well as many cases that were thrown out because Saldet had lied under oath. The U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that the alleged confession by Deborah was the only piece of the evidence that actually linked her to the case, and with the emergence of misconduct claims against Saldet, the testimony was not credible. They also said that if the cases of misconduct against Saldet had been presented during Deborah's trial, the judge would more than likely have been ordered a new trial, or at least ordered a penalty lesser than death. Detective Saldet used his position to manipulate the jury and convince them that Deborah was lying. Essentially, the case was Deborah's word against the detectives, and the prosecution in her case did their best to discredit Deborah, despite a total lack of evidence. Had the court known the major misconducts against Detective Saldet, the case would have had a very different outcome. Freedom finally came for Deborah on December 11, 2014, when the Arizona Appeals Court officially dismissed the charges placed against her for the murder of her son. After 24 years, Deborah was finally exonerated for a crime that she never committed and was able to start the grieving process for her child. Number 4. Damon Thibodeaux was just 22 years old in 1996 when tragedy struck his immediate family. His cousin, Crystal, had been found strangled to death. Crystal left her apartment in July of 1996 to go to a mall in Louisiana. When she didn't return that evening, panic set in for the family. A search of the local area led investigators to an area in Bridge City, and sadly, Crystal was found strangled with a piece of extension cord, and she'd possibly been sexually assaulted and stripped almost nude. For some reason, Damon became the investigator's first suspect due to him being related to Crystal. He volunteered to take a lie detector test, thinking that it would clear his name. However, after doing so, police informed him that he had actually failed the test. Over the course of 9 hours, Damon was brutally interrogated and finally broke and confessed to assaulting and then murdering his cousin. According to the Innocence Project, only 54 minutes of the 9-hour interrogation was actually recorded, meaning that the other 8 hours and 10 minutes could only be verified by those involved. We don't know what happened during that time, and it's most likely that Damon was heavily intimidated by investigators and pressured into giving a false confession. The problem with the confession didn't just lay in the unrecorded sections, as many of the details provided by Damon didn't even match up to the crime. Damon told investigators that he'd strangled his cousin with a white or gray cord. However, we know that the cord was red. No forensic or physical evidence was found that connected Damon to the murder of his cousin, and the only evidence was the alleged confession and 2 eyewitness testimonies. Despite the flimsy evidence against him, Damon was convicted of the murder and sent to the Louisiana death row. Finally, in 2007, a reinvestigation by the Jefferson Parish District Attorney's Office proved that there was no physical evidence connecting Damon to the crime. It even stated that there was no evidence to prove that Crystal had been sexually assaulted. Further analysis of the red cord used to strangle her revealed male DNA that did not match Damon. Thanks to testing, Damon became the 300th person to be exonerated after serving 15 years on death row for a crime he wasn't involved in. Damon was released in September of 2012 and is slowly adjusting to life on the outside. Number 3. Liam Allen was excited in 2015 when he started his criminology course at Greenwich University in London. Liam looked forward to the prospect of studying something that he truly enjoyed, along with getting to live the stereotypical student life of drinking and partying. Liam had been with his current girlfriend for a little while, and the pair decided to continue their relationship once Liam had enrolled in university, although it became apparent to Liam that the demands of university life were having an impact on his relationship. He decided that it was the best for both of them if they broke up, so he could continue focusing on earning his degree, and understandably, his girlfriend was brokenhearted. Following the breakup, Liam thought that the pair were done and that would be the last involvement he had with his ex, but sadly, he was very wrong. In January of 2017, he was making his way to his car after playing football, and that's when he saw police officers waiting for him at his car. Liam was swiftly arrested and charged with 6 counts of rape and 1 count of sexual assault. According to officers, his ex-girlfriend testified that he'd forced her hands behind her back, tied her up to bedpost, and even held a pillow over her face during intercourse. Liam was facing up to 20 years in prison and was held in a local prison awaiting his trial. He described his time as mental torture, saying he was unable to speak to people close to him because it might impact the trial. Police told him you're all on your own, and that he could not talk to his mother about the details of the case because she may have been called as a witness, and that he couldn't even speak to friends because they too may have also been called up to give evidence. On the night before his trial, which was scheduled to take place in December of 2017, police gave his defense teams 58,000 tests from the victim's phone that had been requested previously. The barrister diligently scored over 2,500 pages until the early morning hours in the morning in hopes that she would find something, and she did. The text that Barrister had found from the victim's record was sent just days after, on September 3rd. The texts detail her sexual relationship with Liam, with one message in particular saying it wasn't against my will or anything. Just before Christmas of 2017, the case against Liam was dropped due to the new evidence that had come to light in his case. Liam's case prompted inquiries into other sexual assault cases, and a further 47 cases were dropped. Number 2. Ryan Matthews was just 17 years old when he was convicted of the April 7, 1997 murder of a man named Tommy in Bridge City, Louisiana. Tommy had been shot in the supermarket that he owned, and eyewitnesses claimed that a masked gunman attempted to rob him at gunpoint and shot him when he refused to hand over the money. One of the eyewitnesses positively identified Ryan as the assailant. However, the passenger in his car could not make a positive identification of the suspect. Matthews, along with Travis Hayes, who was also 17, were pulled over just a few hours after the murder because they drove a car that resembled that of the perpetrator. After a grueling 6-hour interrogation, Matthews admitted that he was the one in the store. According to an article written by the National Registry of Exonerations, both Matthews and Hayes were borderline intellectually disabled and were possibly unable to understand the interrogation and the charges brought against them. An IQ test showed that Ryan had an IQ of just 71. Nevertheless, Ryan was convicted of murder on March 6, 1999, despite the fact that the only evidence against him was the eyewitness testimony. Many have also commented that the jurors in the court case were rushed to make a conviction with little time to deliberate. The jury were forced to listen to presenting evidence through the night and reached a verdict at 5 a.m. after the judge had ordered them to continue until a verdict was met. The jury had been subjected to 14 hours of evidence presentation, with no sleep and few breaks allowed. It's speculated that this had a significant impact on their decision. Further testing of the DNA evidence found on the ski mask did not match Ryan or his friend Hayes. It did, however, match another convict who was serving 20 years. Following the new evidence that was brought to light in Ryan's case, he was granted a new trial in 2004. In December of 2006, Ryan Matthews was released from Louisiana death row and became the 14th person to prove innocent by post-conviction DNA testing, according to the Innocence Project. As of January 2007, the charges against Ryan Matthews were officially dropped, and he's now a free man, who was awarded $252,000 in compensation for his time spent on death row. But for Ryan, the best compensation is the fact of knowing that he was saved from execution by last-minute evidence. Number 1. Rodney Reed is a well-known name amongst true crime fans and fighters of justice alike. Reed was arrested in 1996 for the murder of 19-year-old Stacey Stites in Texas. The evidence against Rodney was that small amounts of sperm found inside Stites' body were a DNA match to him, and thus the courts used this as evidence that Reed was in fact her killer. Reed himself had protested his innocence since the day of his arrest and says that his relationship with Stites was 100% consensual, meaning that the DNA found in her body was not the result of an assault. The first suspect in Stites' case was her fiancé, Jimmy Fennell, who at the time was a Bastrop police officer who had a record of violence towards women. Fennell had even kidnapped a woman and assaulted her whilst he was on duty as a police officer. Despite all of this, Reed was convicted of her murder and sentenced to death. No DNA evidence apart from the sperm found in Stites' body actually linked Reed to the case. Even members of Stacey's family have testified that her and Reed were in a consensual relationship. Demands of further DNA testing on the murder weapon have been denied, further adding fuel to the fire of Reed's innocence. On November 20th, 2019, Rodney Reed was set to face death by lethal injection. However, on November 16th, a last-minute stay of execution was granted by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. His lawyers have since submitted more evidence in the case of Rodney Reed and are working tirelessly to get further DNA testing done on all of the evidence. Since his stay of execution, Reed's sentence was altered to life, though the sentencing could soon be overturned if the evidence brought to light proves his innocence. Stacey's own fiancé, Jimmy Fennell, had said to many friends that he'd threatened to kill Stacey and even claimed that she got what she deserved at her funeral after he discovered her secret affair with Reed. Rodney Reed's case is ever-changing, with new pieces of evidence and information coming to light every day. Hopefully, if Rodney is innocent, new forensic testing on the DNA found at the scene will clear him. Rodney has currently served 21 years on death row for a crime he most likely didn't commit. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.